Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Sharon Lee. Sharon, could you take a moment to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Sharon Lee, and I've been in the nonprofit charitable sector for 20 years, and currently I'm with the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation.
Awesome. Sharon, so I'm curious to know your superhero origin story. That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
My journey into nonprofit sector wasn't a linear one. I started at a community health care center, the first of its kind in Ontario, called LAMP, which stands for Lakeshore Area Multi-Services Project, at a time when Bob Ray was the premier of Ontario, and he had wanted to balance the budget, which meant there weren't a lot of opportunities for someone who had just graduated with a BA in sociology and communications. So this really sort of propelled me towards something unconventional like the nonprofit sector, where I quickly realized there was a community need for supportive programs, right? And over time, I realized that my passion not only just wanted to help people and telling their stories, but shaping them and driving systemic change that can improve lives, right? And so when I joined the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, it was a pivotal moment in time for me because I recognized that as a rare disease, um, there's not a lot of support for it, and it was a private family foundation for a decade, and I saw an opportunity to expand its reach and its impact by transforming it into a public foundation, which allowed us to grow the programs and services, and ultimately, making a greater impact for those living with pulmonary fibrosis, right? So that sort of sums my commitment to the nonprofit sector.
I'm curious because you mentioned you moved toward nonprofits, but was there any particular interest beforehand, or was it just an opportunity that came to pass that you said this could be interesting? Like, what was your thought process
Well,
as you decided to jump into that kind of
so
work?
the funny thing is, Alex, is that I went to school for computer science.
Hmm.
And it was during my last year that I took this, what they call shadow mentoring program to say, these are all the jobs that you can get when you graduate with your degree. And that's when I realized, my goodness, that's not what I wanted to do. And then I did a personality test to see where I best suited. So it was called Know Your Colors, and I was 40% gold, 20% green, blue, and orange. So gold standard for the standard stuff, green was the scientific, the blue was the emotional support, and the orange was the Maverick. And so I made a decision, a bold choice. I told my parents, I'm going to stay one more year, do a different type of degree because computer science wasn't what I wanted to do. And unfortunately, because I took that one extra year, the economy sort of tanked, right? Because they had to balance the budget, people were cutting back, people weren't sure what it meant. And so that's propelled me. And I think to myself that maybe that wasn't a bad thing. I mean, at the time I was just horrified and so upset. But I look back on it now and I think that that was a good door to open because it led me into something that I never thought about.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just amazing how life. And I don't know if you ever do this to yourself, but I take a moment every once in a while to appreciate where I've come from, and that the tree, I call it kind of a tree structure, to see the roots going back up to the branches, or vice versa. I don't know how the analogy works, but the idea of seeing where you've come from and who the people allowed you to be where you are today. I think it's a fascinating retrospective to take.
Yeah, I agree.
So you describe yourself as a maverick leader. I was and this personality trait ENTJ, which I don't remember the. I
It's
remember
a Briggs Myers
that's right, the Briggs Myers.
terminology. So I've done a couple of them, and they all come back that I'm a maverick. So I love stability, but I also look at how can we re-engineer that stability, right? So it means I'm not afraid to challenge the status quo. Because so many organizations, when I go to them, I go, well, why do we do this? I don't know. We just been doing it. Okay. Does it serve a purpose? We don't know. We just keep doing it. And that's what charities do. And so I try to then say, okay, well, let's look at it. Does anybody want this service? Does anybody want this product? If not, why are we putting energy and time into doing it? Why not resurface it to someone, to reroute it to something else that would be more positive. And so what I do is, because of my personality test, I believe in questioning the conventional wisdom to find better solutions, right? So, for example, at the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, I led the shift from traditional fundraising methods to more diverse strategy, like incorporating digital campaigns, strategic partnerships, and community-driven events, right? These approaches not only increased our fundraising, but also broadened our reach and engagement. And I encourage my team to think differently, to innovate, to embrace and calculate the risk, because that's how transformative changes happens, right? Because,
Mhm.
boards will say, Sharon, we need to do more of this service. Well, everything boils down to how you can get funding for it, because it's great you want to do these services, but where's the funding coming from? And how do you do that? But by looking outside the box, because there are 22,000 other great charities out there. But what makes you valuable to that one individual? How do you touch their heart? How do you make them see that what you're doing is exactly what they want to support?
Have you ever heard of the story of the five monkeys?
No.
So going back to challenging the status quo, I'm pretty sure it's an allegory. The idea is, and I'll give a short version of it. There was a bunch of scientists that had five monkeys in a room. And in the middle of the center of the room, there was a painter's ladder. And at the top of this painter's ladder were a bunch of bananas. And any time that one monkey went up to try and get the bananas, the scientists would splash all the other four monkeys with water, which of course would make them very upset. So from that point onward, anytime someone started going up, because the other monkeys did not want to get splashed, they would prevent that monkey from climbing the ladder until a status quo was reached where none of the monkeys would go for the bananas. Then the scientists decided to swap one monkey for a new monkey. And the new monkey, of course, doesn't know any of the rules. So they went up, tried going up the ladder for the bananas, and all the other four who knew what's going to happen stopped that monkey from going up. And then status quo again. And they swapped another monkey until all original monkeys are no longer there. It's all been new monkeys. None of them go up the ladder, but none of them know why. And that's basically the moral behind that story is sometimes people do things, they don't even know why they do it. They've lost the history of why the decision was ever made. So being able to challenge it and question it and look at it again and see if it's still valid today is really an important consideration.
Yeah, I agree.
Every time that I hear the challenging the status quo, I have to tell people about the story because it's just to me a beautiful way of describing that. And yeah, just wanted to share that. So um, innovation, looking outside the box, these are terms that are sometimes like I'm going to play devil's advocate for just a second because I'm a complete advocate for these things. I think it's important to not only look at what you're doing, but also looking at the outer layers of it to make sure that it all lines up and there's a reason why we're doing, like you need to see the big picture basically before you see the smaller one and get to the details. And then it's important to challenge certain things so you don't just fall into the same kind of traps. I was wondering, because I sometimes get this kind of feedback where if every step you try to do is questioned, does it become challenging to move forward? Does it slow the progress of forward movement? Or these questions are so important to make sure we are taking the right steps that it's better to wait and take a step than just start running and then realize you're going in the wrong direction?
I totally agree with you, Alex. That's happened to me throughout my career where people go, no, you're not going to do that. No, you're not going to do this. And so what I've learned is that to anticipate their concern. So you want to say the reason why we want to do this because it's going to address the following things that we all agree that we're concerned about. And so once you establish that, then you say, well, here's my proposal to say here's two options. We could go this route and do this, or go the second route and do that. And which one would the board prefer, or your team, or whoever? And then they have control. And because they have control, have buy-in. And so you always have to have buy-in, because without buy-in or understanding or verifying that the validity of their concern, you're going to get resistance. So I've
Mm.
learned that over time that you want to have buy-in. Like, for example, for the question of oxygen. We advocate across the country that people with pulmonary fibrosis should have oxygen when they need it because there's no cure for this disease. And eventually, you become so breathless that you need oxygen. And so every single province and the three territories, all said, "Oh, Sharon, oxygen is a drug. You could be addictive." And I said, you're right. Oxygen is classified as a drug. And if it's addictive, then we're all addicts in this room, except that we have this organ that can produce it for us. I said, does it make sense? So I challenge the status quo thinking that way. And then, rather than when I do advocacy work, lots of people say, "Oh, we're good charity. We're good people. We deserve that." I always think, what is the government thinking about? Think about all the pressures they have on their budgets. What do they need to achieve and accomplish for their mandate? So I take into all that and I work with all the parties and I said, look, here's the problem. People that need oxygen, whether you have lung cancer, whether you have asthma, COPD, it doesn't matter. Any respiratory ailment. I've gotten all the nonprofit organization that work in those fields to come together and collaborate on this to say that it's not just for my community, but it's for everyone. So we're saying, if it gets prescribed, people should get it. And why? And I'm just used the example of Ontario just because I know the numbers better here. The current government or the previous government, the Ford government, they had done hallway medicine. And in there they stated that it was $1,700 a day for a patient to be in the hospital. That does not account for the cost of the doctor, the nurses, the medication. It's just to be in the hospital, be in that bed. And so we said, well, most people with pulmonary fibrosis, if they have a compromised immune system, because they do, will end up being in the hospital at least 20 days a year. You multiply that, right? So that's almost like $40,000. It would cost you a fraction of that, maybe 10 in a year to give someone oxygen. So you basically saved $30,000. So that's how I presented to them. And they thought, wow. And so in Ontario, they decided no more. If anybody needed oxygen, you get oxygen. There's no more testing for it because if your doctor prescribed it, no one's going to willy-nilly prescribe you oxygen unless you need it. No one that I know says, "Oh, look at my status symbol. I'm using oxygen," right?
Mm.
So those are the status quo that I always push back on. And I try to take into consideration what the government concerns are, what the general public is. How can we find a win-win? Well, the win-win was that everybody who needs oxygen got oxygen. It saved the government money, the healthcare system at the end of the day. And acknowledged, something that in the system that wasn't working correctly, but we corrected it without a lot of fuss or muss or a big hoopla of anything, right?
I love the way you make the financial comparison because that makes the decision so much easier and clearer, right? Like if you are saving
Mhm.
them thousands of dollars and here are the data, here's the data that backs it up. I mean, it's very hard to dispute that and then make a decision in the wrong direction. So, like you said, it's a win-win, and that's wonderful. And it's a fresh, not a fresh take. It's not quite the right word, but it's definitely a succinct way of presenting a message to get the actions that you want.
Yeah, so that's just the way I think, right? I always think, look, everybody has to feel they had a win, right? That something, they got something back in exchange because that's a lot of more collaboration than if somebody thought only I gave up and I got nothing in return.
Yeah, yeah, that's I agree. I mean, the more wins you can have, the more everybody. This is not a zero sum game, or at least it shouldn't be, and that everybody should get a piece of the pie. It's not about me getting the pie and someone else not getting the pie as a result of my actions or whatever we're trying to do. So,
Yeah. And
glad
I
to
try
hear.
to do that with all the rare disease organizations across Canada because I said we are small. Like we only have 30,000. Some of them only have maybe five individuals. You know, anything under 100,000 you consider small. But if we come collectively on one particular issue that benefits all of us, we're stronger for it, right? At the end of the day, I always tell people, and even my GR person, like my government relations person, said that I have a different way of thinking. I said, at the end of the day, the government looks at all these costs as a hindrance. As one health minister said to me, well, Sharon, if we lost these people, what does it matter? They're just off the payroll, meaning that they didn't have to pay out the disability, they didn't have to pay out whatever. And I said, well, yeah, that's a good way of thinking it. But have you ever thought about the fact that if you supported them properly, that you can actually gain $2 million? And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to do at the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation is find the economic gains by supporting individuals, right? So instead of saying we're going to we could save, $30,000 individual. Well, you know what? If you supported them, with that 30,000, you can gain a lifetime of $2 million because of the income tax they pay, all the things that they buy and support. Like, just think about that. It just builds on the economy.
Up until now, you've been talking a lot about the money and using money as your leverage or your tool of measuring things. Your metric. Is there any other metrics that you would or you like to use that allows you to start pushing a certain narrative? Not pushing, but encouraging a certain narrative. Because money, of course, is a very powerful one. But I'm wondering if there's anything else that can be served as a proxy or alternative to try to resonate your message with others.
Yeah. So, like, impact measurement goes beyond numbers, as you said. It's about the stories behind those numbers. So we track quantitative metrics like funds raised, program participation rates, and advocacy outcomes. But we also prioritize qualitative data like patient testimonials, right? We have people, if you came to our cpff.ca website, lots of patients said, I felt that I was alone on this journey, but now I found a community, right? I
Mm.
found people that can support me and understand where I'm coming from. So we do patient testimonials, community feedback, and changes in quality of life. So for us, for someone, if we were able to help them to say, that they could go up to their cottage for that one summer, that means a lot for us, right? And we also do things that our community tell us, like pulmonary rehab, right? We'll measure not just a number of patients, but improvements to their health outcomes and personal experience. And so we always take regular assessments of stakeholder feedback. We do look at the data-driven evaluations, and we want to make sure that we're on the right track. Because my main motto has always been never assume, always ask. Don't assume you know what your community wants or what the patient wants. It's different for everyone. Let's just ask and see how can we help and facilitate that for all of them.
So when you say ask, I mean, you're talking about surveys, you're talking about knocking door to door. How would you normally and typically do that?
We ask through our surveys. Every 2 years, the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation conducts a nationwide survey, and we ask questions like, what do you find useful? What do you think we should stop doing? How do you feel about the drug treatment therapies? How are you on oxygen? What about pulmonary rehab? Is there anything else that we haven't thought about? And we leave it a huge space for them to fill that out and tell us. And then we take it back, and that's what we use to create our strategies, right, at the organization. And that's what I bring back to say, look, here's where people are saying that they need more support groups. And because of COVID, they're not able to come in person because a lot of the hospitals and the libraries and the public communities that used to host those large groups no longer want to do that anymore because the fear of spreading diseases and other liabilities. So we created a national patient support group, a national caregiver support group, and we do webinars across the country so that you could do it in the comfort of your own home and you're not worried about, catching the cold, the flu, or COVID. And it's really helped a lot of people. We've come to become a really good community. And we encourage people from those groups to say, hey, if you're willing to share where you live, maybe those that live close by can get together and meet up for coffee or something, right? And that's been working out really, really well. So it helps people that you connect broadly across the country, but also, community wise in your neighborhood. Because sometimes people think, oh, this only happens to me. But if you live in BC and you realize that somebody from Newfoundland has the exact same experience, you think, I'm not alone. It's not unique. It's okay, right? Here's a group that's going to help me to get through it.
Yeah, having support and a support network is just so vital whenever you're, I could say down on your luck, but that's not quite the right wording I'm looking for either. But the idea of knowing you're not alone is such a powerful tool to help you feel better about yourself and your situation, that there's some kind of solidarity between people who have similar issues. And then you can, help each other, support each other, offer advice, and just be there for each other.
Mhm.
When I was checking out your LinkedIn profile, one of the things that caught my attention was you being passionate about creating sustainable solutions. I was wondering if you could share an example of one and like how, what made it sustainable and what kind of impact did you have when doing it?
Well, I have to say that, the reason why I always say ask, never assume, because you don't want to create something that really no one wants. You want to make sure that you're creating something that people genuinely want or need. And you want to know that you created something that if you are no longer part of that project and you gave it to them, that they're able to carry it forward and carry it on, right? Because there's nothing worse than when you finish the project and the people that are left behind with the project aren't able to carry it on, or it's just not working for them, right? So it's just a concept that I've always had. And also because as a Rotarian, every project we do, we always say we have to use the materials, the tools, the individuals, their talent and skills in that community. And how do we help them to lift them up, not to give a hand out, but lift them up, a hand up anyways, and make sure that they can maintain it, right? And one of the things that I know that we've done in my volunteer work is that we've done this orange grove in Africa. And the reason why it started because they had scurvy, they had lack of vitamin C, and we kept on thinking, well, how do we figure this out? And so this one Rotarian named Richard, he said, have you ever thought about creating an orange grove because your climate is very conducive to growing orange trees? And so we did that. We got the seeds. We showed them how to manage it. And then over a 5-year period, when the trees matured and they started to producing oranges, that's when they sold it. They gave the oranges away to the community, to the kids, so that it lessened the scurvy and everything. And then and now it's a 20-year project, but you know what? They're doing it, not us. They are managing the orange trees, the orange groves. They're managing the marketing of those orange to different communities because they have produced so much that they can now help other communities. And it's a really wonderful thing because the next thing we would like to go back to them is to say, hey, have you ever thought about manufacturing it into and just distributing it further down from your communities that you're reaching now. And so they're looking at doing a second orange grove, but this is all on their own initiative, right? So this is what I'm saying about sustainable projects, that you want to make sure that it's wanted by the community, they understand it, it's simple tools that they could use. They use the manure from their animals, they have a water diversion program, and it benefits everyone in the community because everybody has a job in maintaining those trees and picking those oranges, taking them to market. It's just a really great community work and project. And so it's just great.
It reminds me of a guest I had on a few months ago where they would go to parts of Africa as well and give them, or was it sell them, a water wheel, a wheel where they're able to produce their own water, but or a pump or something like that. I forget the exact details now. It's been a while, but the idea is that instead of the most important part that made this whole thing successful was not that they maintained ownership of it, but they actually gave ownership to the community. And so they took responsibility for it and maintained it over time versus they've seen experiences where if they were to keep ownership themselves as an organization, these people would just assume that this is not theirs, therefore I shouldn't maintain it, and they'll fix it if it ever goes wrong or breaks. And the fact that they owned it allowed them to have a tremendous amount of water and same thing, sell it to native or local communities in the area. And it was a smashing success as a terms of a program. So that orange tree, orange groves scenario sounds very similar to that, which I think is very empowering in addition to being sustainable.
Mhm. Because they saw the orange groves as theirs. They
Yes.
saw that they had a future. There was a way for them to be proud of the product that they produced. And many of their children, because of the revenues that was generated, were able to go on to university and learn more about agricultural and come back and cultivate and make those better orange groves. And that's why they're looking into a second set of orange groves to start, right? So it's really done a whole generation of good.
Another thing I noticed on your profile on LinkedIn was about servant leadership. And again, I also had a guest on many, many years ago. Well, not that many years ago. I was going to say many months, but it's been more than months, who was talking about servant leadership. I was curious to know what that means to you and how do you become a servant leader or, what are the factors of or characteristics of a servant leadership?
For me, servant leadership to me means that I lead with empathy, humility, and a deep commitment to the well-being of others, right? It's about flipping the traditional leadership model. Instead of people serving the leader serves the people. And I practice this by actively listening to my team, creating spaces where their voices are heard, empowering them to take ownership of their work. And in the community, it means engaging directly with those that we serve, understanding their challenges, and co creating solutions with them rather than for them. So that's sort of like, with my Orange Grove story, and same thing with the community. Rather than telling them what we're going to do, I always say, like, I never assume, I'm asking you. What would you like, right? And I have regular feedback loops, open communications, and I'm always willing to listen to somebody's ideas, think about it, and how can I help them, right? Because it's not about me. And so I use my Maverick leadership skills and my ENTJ passion to help them by serving them that way to say, well, have you ever thought about if you just did this slightly different, you can actually achieve what you want to do rather than going telling them this is how you do it, this is how you achieve that. It's not my personality to do that.
I like the words with, you're doing it with someone instead of for them. That to me is I wanted to underline that because that's, I think, very an important distinction. It's a collaboration. Yes, you might have more experience in this particular aspect, but you don't want to just assume that because you do, you know everything that there is to know and you know what the right path forward is. And being able to collaborate with the people you're trying to help to get them involved, to get them part of the decision making process, I think is a wonderful way to describe servant leadership.
Well, thank you.
I'm curious about also bigger trends about nonprofits in general, because I know you've got quite a bit of experience with it. I was curious to know, if you find any trends that have been happening over the past couple of years. I know, of course, the pandemic is mostly behind us at this point, but I'm curious to know if there's any trends that you've seen over the past several years or and things you would like to see in the future of where things are going at a high level in the nonprofit industry.
Yeah, I have to say that the one major challenge for the nonprofit sector is funding stability, right? And sustainability. It's always a challenge. And it's very challenging in the traditional donor models because I mean, one thing good about COVID is that it sort of showed us that there are holes in our traditional donor models, right? We always assume that we can gather together to meet, to to build relationships that way. Well, when you build relationships virtually, it's very different than how you do it in person, right? And it really made you understand, at least for me, that we have to find opportunities to diversify the revenue streams through partnerships, social enterprises, and digital fundraising, right? And another challenge is the navigating the increasing demand for transparency and accountability. I mean, I believe in every single charity out there in Canada, but I have to be honest, the way they report, it's not always apples to apples, right? You think people go, wow, like they pay so little in administration. Okay, but then how many people do they serve, right? So you have to think about that. I mean, they can bring in $1 million, but they only spend $10 on min. Does that mean they only served one person, right? And I see that there's an opportunity to build deeper trust with stakeholders, right? That we can show them, be honest about where we spend. Because I always tell all of my donors that, don't designate your donations because you don't know if you designate what happened if that situation got resolved. Then what are we going to do with the money that you gave us? Trust us with your money. Empower us and tell us the spirit of what you want to do. And we'll come back and demonstrate, how we've achieved that. So that's what I do with all my donors. And I also show them and give them an opportunity to say, you know, is this something that you would like to participate in? So that not only are you donating, but maybe you like to participate, right? And I want to get people to understand that nonprofits have to embrace change. They have to invest in leadership development. I can't tell you how many times when I said to, the organizations I work for, I need some money to go take this course. Yes, I know it's 20,000, but it's going to be worth it because you'll get this back. And they'll say, "Oh, sorry, Sharon, we can't do that," because that's the first thing they always cut, right? It's like, well, no, we don't need to develop, but you need to. You need to invest in your leadership, right? You need to foster a culture of continuously learning for your staff to develop and grow, and then to make your organization stronger. Right? So those are some of the things that I see as the landscape changing, and it's just getting harder and harder these days because of all the political changes happening in the U.S. and how it's impacting on Canada, and how are we going to be able to combat those changes and to make it better for all of us.
Yeah, it's I totally agree, and I love the idea of the leadership development because spending money on being better and getting better. I mean, education to me is a lifelong journey. You don't just finish at one point saying, "Okay, I'm done. I don't have anything else to learn." It has to continue. I'm curious to know though if because you're right, it's a typical resistance to say, "Well, hang on, this 20,000 could be better served, or we believe it can be better served on this program or whatnot. Why would we want to spend it on one person doing one type of program or some kind of education?" How would you normally handle that kind of resistance? Do you have a particular approach to say, again, using your metrics and using your ability to not change, but compare pricing and
Yeah,
things? Is there a way that you can reframe it that maybe you could share an
yeah.
example of how you would do that?
You know, I see myself as someone say, look, if you gave me this opportunity, supported me here, this is what the organization will benefit from. So, for example, the ICD program basically is $20,000. But from there, you can learn about board governance, what are people looking for, how can you make it better for your organization for board governance to work better. And in that return, then you can say, okay, this is what we could do to our organization by soliciting and bringing people with certain skill set, by doing matrix analysis, by looking at are we representing all of Canada? Do we have enough people from the east, the west, the north? Those are all the metrics that you can look at. And then I also said too, when you invest something like that in an individual, you can always say, look, then our assumption is that you're going to stay with us for the next 2 years and not leave. And if you do, then we expect you to pay half of it back because they did get half of the benefit from it, right? So there's lots of ways to do that, to say that this is what the organization can benefit from, how that leader can then benefit the team, how can they bring up and shore up some of the shortfalls that they might notice that they might not have notified before. So there's all sorts of things that you could do, right? And I just think that I try very hard to do that even for my own team members because I try to think, okay, what can they do that could help them to further the organization and benefit the community, but also further their own career, right? I'm a realist. I just think like, look, while you're working with me, I'm gonna try to guide you, mentor you, and also help you to propel you where you want to be in 5 years' time. Because I always ask them, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? How can I support you to get there? Because then at the end of the day, I know I'm going to get 110% back because that individual realizes that I'm honestly trying to help them better themselves and by bettering the community and the organization, but also that they are able to further their own career wherever it is that they want to go. And I'm hoping that they'll stay with us, but I also understand that sometimes people want to inspire to a different position that might not be available with us, right?
Mm. And thanks for sharing that. And that kind of leads me actually to my next question about some of the challenges that nonprofits generally have, or you see some of the biggest challenges that nonprofits may have these days. And of course, with every challenge comes an opportunity. I was wondering if you have any opinion about, how can certain organizations adopt to these kinds of challenges and thrive given all these uncertainties and political movements that are happening?
I think some of the challenge is that we have 22,000 charities. And when you start looking at some of them, they really overlap in a lot of ways. And I'm just thinking, why can we collaborate more? You know, often like because pulmonary fibrosis is a lung disease of a particular part of the lung disease, interstitial lung disease, and there's 200 types of them. And one of my pet peeves is that the lung associations, or I guess they're calling themselves Breathe Better now, um, they say they do everything for the lungs. And I always challenge them. I said, no, you don't. You focus on asthma, COPD, and lung cancer for the most part. And so I'm not sure why you object to me trying to do work in the pulmonary fibrosis arena when you don't do any of that. Like, why wouldn't you direct people to us and we could direct people back to you when they don't belong into our community, that they belong into the asthma community or the COPD community? Like, I'm not sure why we couldn't collaborate together and work on those. It's always boils down to the money, the prestige. And I often think that, that's a sad statement to make because we could be more effective, more efficient if we work together. And I'm not sure how that would work. And then also, I'm concerned about donor fatigue. I'm always trying to be very respectful that we don't ask our donors often. So if you follow CPFF on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, you'll notice that we're always giving you information. We're not asking you for funds all the time. It's in the background if you want to. But I find so many charities, like include the food banks, when I made a donation, the next thing you know, they are emailing you obnoxiously. They're mailing you stuff to make a donation. I'm thinking, how much is that costing you? Like, how much of my money is actually going to the people who need it? Um, so, those are some of the challenges that I see. And also, too, the other challenge that I see is that there's a demand for us to do more with less. We are paid less than our counterparts in the for-profit world. When I just think, why? We do the same work. We have the same level of like, expertise, innovation, and leadership as for any for-profit business. And yet, we as nonprofit professionals expected to be paid less, have less benefits. And unless you work for a hospital or a university, I mean, you know, you're not making the big bucks. And I just think that our impact shouldn't be measured by profit margins, but the lives that we touch and the systems that we change, right?
I'm always disappointed and a bit surprised too to hear that nonprofits in general have to do more with less. Like it's like I kind of get it, but I don't quite get it. It doesn't really make sense to me because to me, being a charity or a nonprofit is more of a non a tax designation than anything else. I mean, especially at the larger levels, they operate exactly or nearly exactly the same as any other enterprise company. So to be paid less for it just because, like, it would be almost, to me, it should be the opposite, right? Because you are actually having a positive impact in the community, why wouldn't you be paid more for it? Like, where is the gap actually coming from?
I think it comes from the word charity, because charitable organizations started out as people doing charitable work, right? And they were never paid. They were like, they were saying, well, um, it's what we do, right? It's what we do. And so now that we're trying to make it into a profession, it becomes really, really hard. And I guess the other thing for that, if you have you ever read Uncharitable, um, and his name, I'm just trying to figure out. His name is Dan something, and gosh, I can't remember his name, but it's called Uncharitable. And he talks about it in that book where charity always started off with people doing good and everything, not being paid. But as we fulfill more and more of the social gaps that are not paid for, it becomes more of a professional organization. We have to figure out how do we do more with less, really. And it's an oxymoron because the more you do with less, the more they expected of you, right? And it's a really hard thing to break. It really, really is. I'm not sure how can we um, get charitable organization the same atmosphere as the nonprofit, because like I said, the work that we do requires the same level of expertise, innovation, and leadership for any for-profit business. And the other thing that we bring to the table is our passion. We're so passionate about what we do, and yet we're supposed to say that that passion is supposed to sustain us in paying our bills, our mortgages, and everything else that everybody else does. And there are some days when I think I'm not sure how I can stay in the charitable world anymore, because it's harder and harder, even for me personally, to pay all my bills, like just regular things of buying food, paying for my mortgage, paying for my car payment, all those regular things that we all face and have to pay.
Yeah. So looking also at a high level glance of everything here, because there are some people I'm sure listening to this who are not quite in the nonprofit sector or only see pieces of it. I'm curious to know from your perspective, is there one thing that you wish more people would understand about the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, people should understand the nonprofit sector are not just charitable organizations, but they are strategic and impact driven enterprises. We see a need and we go and fulfill it. For example, the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation, it was started by our founder, Robert Davidson, because he got a diagnosis of this disease that there was no cure for. He never even heard of it. And he thought, what is it? And he was so upset that there was no information. And he did the thing that we always do, the Dr. Google thing. And it says, oh, there's no cure. You're going to die in 3 to 5 years. He thought, well, nuts to that. But for him, because it was too late for him, he got a double lung transplant. And after that, he said to his wife, Heather, who's the co founder of our foundation, he said, I want to create a place where no one has to go through what I did. And they're going to find a community and a place where they're going to belong and know they're going to be supported. And so that's the thing that nonprofit sector charitable organizations always start off is with somebody's passion, someone wanting to educate others so that you're not alone, that you're not on this journey. And so for people like me who come to these organizations that took it from a private family foundation into a public foundation, it's because we recognize there's a far more reach out there. As we learn more and more about this disease, we recognize that people with connective tissue diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and scleroderma can also lead to this disease of pulmonary fibrosis, because your lungs are made of tissues. And when your tissues and connective tissues harden or they get stiffened, well, that does the same thing to your lungs, right? And so now what people need to understand is that as we've grown and done this and worked with the medical professions, with pharma to see what they're doing in research and everything else, we are actually fulfilling a work that no one else wants to take on, right? That's the thing. If it was profitable, somebody would have made $1 billion and become a billionaire. But we do it because we see the good, the benefit to the millions of people who have these disease around the world. And it's something that we're not trying to profit from. We're just trying to find a cure. We're just trying to help someone to live with this disease. How can they navigate it every single day as they become more and more breathless? How do we make them still enjoy some of the things that they want to enjoy, like taking a simple walk, like doing a load of laundry, or even just sitting there and being with their family to celebrate one more birthday. It's all those little things that people don't realize. This is what we do. This is hope we give. And this is how we built. We're here to make it a better quality of life for people.
That's beautiful. I mean, I'm so thankful for what you do. And I was wondering if you could share then maybe your contact information so that if people have further questions or want to learn more about the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation or any other information, could you share your contact details, please?
Yeah, sure. If you go to cpff.ca, our website is full of information for patients, caregivers, and the healthcare professional. And you can always email us at info@cpff.ca and we'll answer it. And if you want, come to our Facebook page. If you have this disease, then come and join our Canadians Living with Pulmonary Fibrosis. It's a private chat room, and you'll find lots of other people with similar conditions who can help you, regardless of where you live across Canada, right? And we also have a virtual library that we have lots of professional healthcare professionals that explain what a lung transplant is, how to eat better so that you tamper your inflammation in your body with Tracy Reed. And we also have things about advanced care planning, because we always tell people, tell your loved ones, write it down, what you would like if you couldn't speak for yourself, right? And we learned how important that was during COVID. And then we also have things that, are difficult to talk about. It's the MAID, the medical assistance in dying. It's not a thing that we promote, but we recognize that every individual has the right to understand what does that really mean and to look at that. And is that an option for them? It's not for everyone, and not everybody does it, but it's good to know what does that mean, right? And so we are always very, very respectful. So we have lots of things, and we ask our community, help us spread the word. Show your pulmonary fibrosis doctor or your family doctor. We have 2 clips called Tackle the Crackle and What is Pulmonary Fibrosis. They're only 5 minutes, but they explain everything to you. And we're very proud of the fact that several medical schools actually use our 5-minute video to teach their students of this rare disease. What is pulmonary fibrosis? And it's just 5 minutes. It explains it basically to you. And, they said it's so great. They don't have to spend more time than that, because in medical schools, I found they only spend 1 day on various rare diseases. And so we try to make it easier for them to choose us to share, right?
That's awesome. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing everything that you do and your opinion on these great topics. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me on and inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my vision, my hope, my thoughts, and I hope that people will come out to cpff.ca and maybe join us at our community walks, or come and donate or volunteer.
All right. Well, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.